I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard.
When I was a child, my grandmother explained to me what a sundown town was, but that came with the caveat that she was explaining it from the perspective of someone with only an 8th grade education, so she could be forgiven for not doing the greatest of jobs. But I think that she got down to basics. And you see, sundown towns are places where, as the name suggests, when the sun goes down, certain people shouldn't be around. And those certain people were usually anyone but white, but especially black. And one of the most common misconceptions about sundown towns is that they're all located in the South. That couldn't be further from the truth. And so today we're going to be exploring a sundown town in Oregon. Yes, Oregon, a so-called blue state, a so-called progressive state, but a place that also somehow has more sundown towns than some states in the South. And today we're going to explore one such sundown town. And that's the place I currently reside, Roseburg, Oregon. Roseburg, Oregon was founded in 1851, and it was once the site of the 1855 Battle of Hungry Hill, which many people may recognize as part of the Rogue River Wars of 1855 through 1856. And in that battle, you had Native people who were trying to defend their land from the U.S. Army. And this is why in the modern day, you have Native peoples who have their own tribal lands and their own police forces. And you know this because there are certain police substations that are located within the city limits of Roseburg that are actually tribal police. The city of Roseburg got its name from a man whose name was Aaron Rose. And many historians have tried to write flowery descriptions of Aaron Rose, when the truth is, he was a squatter who established a homestead on September 23rd, 1851. Aaron Rose would pass away in 1899, but not before building several structures that would go on to become what we know today as Roseburg. This land has a lot of natural resources, and that's what the U.S. Army and many of the early wave white supremacists saw. And so, as American history will show you, whenever a non-white person has anything of value, you can expect for it to be plundered if the dominant white society finds out about it. And now, from the very beginning, you can see some of the racial tensions. A population of non-white people had their land and their resources taken, and part of their land was named after a white squatter who had no right to be there. And when you look at the lumber industry in Roseburg and all of the natural resources that are being sold and exported, you can get why there are some long-standing tensions between the native population and the white population here, and for good reason. Roseburg is currently known as the timber capital of the nation, or at least that's what many people in Roseburg call this place. In 1960, country singer Johnny Cash released a song called Lumberjack, which immortalized Roseburg wood loggers. And whenever you try to go and research the racist history about Roseburg, even from the Roseburg Public Library, you can find yourself meeting some roadblocks. Like, for example, I recently went down to the Roseburg Public Library where I ran into the library's director, whose name is Chris Riley. And Miss Riley directed me towards the back of the library when I asked about some books about Roseburg's early history. And when we got to the back of the library, I told her the real reason why I wanted some books about Roseburg's early history. And I also informed her of the reason why I was being so cryptic about what I wanted to see, because I noticed that there's a lot of people who suffer from fragility whenever you ask about the history of racism in this particular area. And she seemed to understand exactly the reasons why I was being so cryptic. She told me flat out that there wasn't a whole lot of information available at the Roseburg Public Library about the history of racism, but she did find 2 books about the subject. And a lot of the information that that I'm quoting in this video comes directly from those books. And so the library's director also gave me something else that was quite interesting. She printed out 2 news stories that were about the same guy, and that man's name is Howard Johnson. And you see, Howard Johnson is the only black pastor in all of Roseburg. And there are 2 news articles from the News Reviewer that quote him saying some things that I later confirmed in a phone conversation with Howard Johnson, because I reached out to him and left the voicemail, and he returned my phone call about a day later. And the main reason why I wanted to do this video, when originally I didn't want to do it, was because of Howard Johnson and the way he's been treated in Roseburg. I confirmed that he arrived in Roseburg in 1989, where he says that he received several threats, and the threats haven't stopped into the modern day. And he also spoke about him being affiliated with the school board here, and that recently during the past school year, you've had so many racist incidents that he had to go and speak in front of the school board and discuss many of the things that I'm discussing in this video about the racist history of Roseburg and Oregon in general. And as a result of that 25-minute lecture, there is now a special subcommittee that doesn't have a name yet but will be assigned to investigate racism in this area's school board and also the schools. He also told me about a particular incident in the past school year where you had a student who got suspended for using the N-word. And when that student was asked, why did you use that word? The student responded with, well, I thought it was okay because my mom and dad use it. And spoiler alert, that student is not black, if you understand the demographics in this area. And so when you get people out here claiming that it's actually the fault of the black people that you have so many racist incidents, and yet even a black pastor is not exempt to racism, well, that tells the average person watching this video about the true climate here in Roseburg, Oregon. All you need to do is go ask the current and only black business owner in all of Roseburg. This man's name is DeAndre, and like I said, he is the only black business owner in all of Roseburg. And when he was interviewed, he spoke about Roseburg being a sundown town. And now at this point in the video, you would think, wait a minute, didn't you just say you went down to the Roseburg Public Library and you were asking about these subjects, but they had nothing about this? And my answer to that question is yes. There was no information specifically about the black codes, black laws, and even the fact that Roseburg was a sundown town in terms of in-depth information. And so with DeAndre being a first-hand expert about the racism in Roseburg, I wanted to get his testimony and I wanted to see what he thought. And so I visited the Wild Rose Lounge on this weekend and I saw a funk band by the name of Funk Sway. And their saxophonist is my newest friend whose name is Matthew, who is a white guy. And so I will say that there are a lot of nice white people in Roseburg. But DeAndre decided to give me the honest truth. He said that Roseburg was not only a sundown town, but that many of these people behaved like it was a sundown town even when he arrived in the modern day, because he had to go out and get a lawyer to stop some of the local residents from trying to have his business shut down for no reason, and that this man was being harassed by what he described as some of the legacy residents of Roseburg and some of the very same people who have been going around harassing black residents for a long time now, and those very same people never being addressed by the Roseburg police, because Roseburg police apparently would rather harass black people than to deal with the very dangerous and violent white supremacist threat that you have in this town. Usually, this kind of stuff comes from word of mouth or specifically from the Oregon Historical Society. And once again, you don't need a history book to see the problems here because old habits are hard to get away from. And if you don't know what I mean by that, well, just go check Reddit about the history of Roseburg, like this post here from 2 years ago. This person is speaking about their husband, who is a white person who is a 5th generation Oregonian. And his advice towards black people and people who are non-white is to avoid Prineville, Pendleton, Baker City, Ontario, Roseburg, and Grants Pass. If you were to read certain writings by, let's say for example, a woman named Bethany Kaler, what you'll find is that not only were straight white people being discriminatory towards black people, but you'll find that even the white LGBT had an issue with black people. Because I'm gonna do this in live time. If you were to press Control F and type in Roseburg, what you'll find is that there's some historical data and some historical writings that point to some recent racism that many black and non-white residents might have experienced within their lifetimes who are still alive. In fact, I'm going to read to you this passage here in its entirety. Quote, "Not everyone was moved by this brave new world. Lesbians of color were not particularly inspired to live among starry-eyed white women in the boonies." In 1977, the Black Lesbian Combahee River Collective rejected the idea of lesbian separatism because, quote, "it leaves out far too much and too many people, particularly black men, women, and children," end quote. For all of its revolutionary overtures, lesbian feminism wasn't immune from replicating the same oppressive structures it spurned. Declaring sexual oppression as the zeitgeist of identity overshadowed the very present and dangerous impacts of racism and classism, allowing whiteness as a marker of identity to go largely unnamed in the movement. Lesbian separatism was dreamt of and enacted by white women. Women of color, or quote-unquote third world sisters, as they called themselves, who lived on the lands in Southern Oregon, were brief tenants, largely due to microaggressions within the white lesbian community and more overt racism in Sundown Towns like Roseburg and Grants Pass. Then, as now, the lesbian community grappled with the shortcomings of their utopian project. Quote, "We do not want to see a village of only white middle-class women," end quote, read the 1976 notes from the Oregon Women's Land Trust meeting. Quote, "We keep struggling together and looking inside ourselves to work at breaking the conditioning that we oppress each other with," end quote. But the deeper problem was structural. Identifying as a lesbian woman was not an immediate catalyst for solidarity, end quote. What that is showing you is that even amongst so-called allies in the 70s, you had widespread racism in Roseburg and other parts of Oregon. And so when I see people in the modern day saying, "Hey, I'm a part of this community," or "Hey, I've got some native in me," or "Hey, I'm a part of the LGBT community, I'm an automatic ally," I look at stories like this and I ask the question, who in the world are you trying to fool? And given the history of Roseburg, it is not shocking that you have certain fake allies who were just as bad as the white supremacists because it fits the state's history. Like, for example, many people in Oregon will claim that there were no slaves in Oregon, which was always a lie. Because if there weren't slaves in Oregon, how in the world do you outlaw something that never existed in your state's territory? And even if there weren't a single slave in Oregon, when someone like Frederick Douglass says that Oregon is so racist that he advised that black people not even go there, well, I think that a lot of the white people here who engage in the denialism should seriously take a step back, because claiming that Oregon freed slaves when you also had slaves at one point to even pass a law to ban slavery in Oregon, but even after you banned slavery, you were so bad that Frederick Douglass didn't even want to come to your state. Well, I don't think that you bragging about banning slavery is the flex that you think it is. In fact, not only were there slaves in Oregon, there were also white people who didn't like slavery, but also didn't like living next to black people. And so on July 1843, the state of Oregon outlawed slavery. And now you might be thinking, that sounds great. Oh, slavery got outlawed. Man, that must have been great for black people. Well, hold on, because on June 26 of 1844, there was another law passed called the Lash Laws. And basically those laws stated that if a free black man were to remain in Oregon after 2 years of being freed, he would receive 20 lashes. And for any black woman who remained in Oregon after 3 years of being freed, she would also receive no more than 20 lashes. And the provision that was known as the Lash Laws were also known as the Peter Burnett Lash Law. And Peter Burnett was a white man who became the first U.S. governor of California. And he said that the Lash Laws were a good idea. And I want to remind you, this was California, a so-called progressive state that was talking about how it's okay to just whip black people for the mere crime of existing in the wrong place. And Peter Burnett didn't mince words when he explained the reasons why he thought the Lash Laws were good. Here is a direct quote. Quote, the object is to keep clear of the most troublesome class of population, black people. We are in a new world under the most favorable circumstances, and we wish to avoid most of these evils that have so much afflicted the United States and other countries, end quote. And if you want to know how bad things got, well, on September 21st of 1849, the state of Oregon effectively banned black people. The law prohibited any black person or any mixed race black person to either reside in or enter Oregon. And the reasons given for banning black people are not only interesting, but it also points out something else. Because one of the concerns was that black people would intermingle with native tribes such as the Cow Creek Indian tribe and then rise up against white people. And so effectively, they were keeping black people away from the natives because they understood that black people in America, especially the black descendants of American slaves, have a way of encouraging other groups who are non-white to rise up and stand up against white supremacy. And so when you see modern day white people claiming that the reasons why white people are doing so well in Oregon and in places like Roseburg is due to them pulling themselves up by their bootstraps or hard work, I want you to keep in mind that their whole strategy was to take out all the natives and take their land and their resources and then exclude all the black people and also all of the Hispanic people. And yet you still have white people in Roseburg who will claim that the white success that we're seeing in this town and also in Oregon is all due to hard work, which is like saying that if you pay off all the referees and you pay the other team to lose a game, that your NBA championship should actually count. And I think that we can all agree that is not how life works or reality works.